Part 52. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 512. The 509th chapter of the text of Ruyi Xiaolang Jun rejection. Emperor Chen was stunned and said, "Manner." Yes. Concubine Tang Hui smiled and said, "Your Majesty also knows that Manner and Jing'er have been childhood sweethearts since they were young. I still remember that she often followed Jing'er and called him Brother Jing. Last time we made an alliance with the state of Chu and betrothed Manner to them, Jing'er was sad for a long time." Emperor Chen nodded and said, "I have indeed watched them grow up." Concubine Tang Hui tried to say, "Then what do you think, Your Majesty?" Emperor Chen looked at the dancer in the hall and said, "Let's talk about it later." Concubine Tang Hui nodded, refilled his glass with wine, and stopped asking. For the emperor of a country, speaking is an imperial decree, and writing is an imperial edict. As long as His Majesty does not refuse in person, it means that there is still room for maneuver. For a big family like the Tang family, not refusing is equivalent to agreeing. Tang Yaoyao has a special liking for temples recently. After staying at Ling's house for only 2 days, she secretly ran back and took Xiaoai to the mountain to worship Buddha. Not only did she want to burn incense, she also prepared to donate 3,000 taels of incense money. Tang Yajing has always been stingy with others, and this time she was willing to donate so much, which was beyond Tang Ning's expectations. Not only was she generous to the temple, she suddenly became generous to Xiu'er. She gave Xiu'er one piece after another of the best rouge and powder, high-quality fabrics, and precious jewelry worth hundreds or thousands of taels. The envious Jing'er's eyes were green these 2 days. Tang Ning walked into the yard, looked at Jing'er who was in a daze, and asked, "Jing'er, do you know what Yao Yao and the young lady have been doing in the temple these days?" Jing'er held her chin with one hand and said, "Sister Yao Yao worships Yu Lao, the young lady worships Guanyin, and Sister Xiru also worships Guanyin." Tang Ning shook his head. They would rather believe in Yu Lao and Guanyin than in him, a living person. Humans always like to seek far away instead of near. Whether it is seeking marriage or seeking children, it is obviously more useful to ask him than to ask for blessings from gods and Buddhas. They all left, and Tang Ning had nothing to do. He looked at Jing'er and said, "Let's go, the son-in-law will take you to the street to buy things." Jing'er's spirits immediately lifted up and said, "Really?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "Buy whatever you want today." In order to take care of Jing'er's pitiful little heart and not be jealous of Xiu'er, Tang Ning decided to take her out for a walk. After all, they are all his maids and he can't be partial to one over the other. "Son-in-law, how about this color of rouge?" "Buy." "Son-in-law, this bracelet is so beautiful." "Buy." "Son-in-law, I'll buy them all." Shopping is probably something that can make women excited at any time, no matter if they are big women or small women. When Tang Ning was shopping with Jing'er in a jewelry store, he found a very beautiful hairpin. It was exquisitely crafted and looked elegant. It was very suitable for Zhao Man. He picked it up, but before he could speak, a figure walked up from behind him and said lightly, "The shopkeeper, how much is this hairpin?" The shopkeeper of the jewelry store looked at the young man and said, "Sir, I'm sorry, this guest was the first to like this hairpin." The young man said calmly, "He just picked it up and didn't say he wanted to buy it." "I'll pay double the price." Tang Ning looked at Tang Jing, shook his head, and said, "Give it to him. The workmanship of this hairpin is just a little bit worse. I want the one next to it." When he put it down and reached out to take another one, Tang Jing had already reached out and picked it up first, saying calmly, "The workmanship of the previous one was not good, I want this one." Tang Ning looked at the shopkeeper and said, "I'll pay double the price." Tang Jing said, 4 times. Tang Ning thought about it and said, 5 times. Tang Jing said without hesitation, 10 times. "It's yours." Tang Ning looked at him, picked up the first hairpin, handed it to the shopkeeper, and said, "Pack it up." Tang Jing was stunned for a moment, and then his face became completely gloomy. Tang Ning put away the hairpin, paid the bill, and shook his head gently. The eldest son of the Tang family actually played such a childish trick. He had a grudge against the Tang family, but he had no grudge against Tang Jing personally. But he even wanted to go against him for such a small matter, as if there was a hatred between the two of them, such as the murder of his father and the seizure of his wife. How could such a narrow-minded person become the heir of such a powerful family as the Tang family? Tang Ning turned around, waved his hand, and said, "Ching-er, let's go." The owner of the jewelry store looked at Tang Jing and asked tentatively, "Sir, do you still want this hairpin?" Tang Jing's face was gloomy, and he said, "Take out the best hairpin in your store, which is better than the one that the man just took away." The shopkeeper's face was immediately full of smiles, and he said, "Sir, wait a moment, although the hairpin is of high quality, you can tell at a glance that you are a distinguished person. Our store has a treasure that is the most precious thing in the store. Ordinary people would not take it out. There is only this one." A moment later, Tang Jing walked out of the jewelry store. The shopkeeper sat at the counter, counting the banknotes with shining eyes. A woman came in and asked, "Shopkeeper, do you have any high-quality hairpins here?" The shopkeeper immediately stood up and said, "You can tell at a glance that you are a distinguished person. Our store has a treasure that is the most precious thing in the store. Ordinary people would not take it out. There is only this one." Xiaoi and the others went up the mountain to worship Buddha with Tang Yaoyao, and usually didn't come back until the afternoon. After Tang Ning and Ching Er came back, it was still early. When he returned to the inner courtyard, he found that Zhao Man had returned from the palace. "You came back just in time." Tang Ning walked over, took out a small brocade box from her sleeve, and said, "I was out shopping with Ching Er just now and saw a hairpin that suited you well, so I bought it back. You can try it out." Zhao Man happily took the hairpin and said anxiously, "What if I don't look pretty when I wear it?" "You look beautiful whatever you wear, even if you don't wear it." Tang Ning took the hairpin from her hand and helped her put it on. Zhao Man immediately ran to the bronze mirror. She looked at it for herself, then turned to look at Tang Ning and asked, "Is it beautiful?" Tang Ning walked over, looked at her and said, "Beautiful." Zhao Mangxiao's eyes rolled up, she stood on tiptoes and kissed him gently on the face. Just as a red cloud appeared on her face, there was a sudden knocking sound on the wall on one side. When something happens in the princess's mansion, Zikuku will knock on the wall to remind her to go there. Zhao Man looks at him and says, "I'll go there first and come back later." Princess Mansion, front hall. Zhao Man walked in, looked at Tang Jing, and asked doubtfully, "Why is brother Tang Jing here?" Tang Jing smiled and said, "I'm passing by the Princess Mansion and came to see you." Zhao Man said, "It seems like we haven't seen each other for a long time." Tang Jing thought for a while and said, "We haven't met since you went to Chu State." When Zhao Man mentioned the kingdom of Chu, he remembered the time when he was the loneliest and most helpless. Later, he remembered that Tang Ning had gradually become a wedding messenger, accompanying her in dangerous situations to the kingdom of Chu, and then going to great lengths to get her out of Chu. "When I came back from the country, my heart was immediately filled with sweetness, and a smile couldn't help but appear on my face." Tang Jing looked at Zhao Man's chuckle and his eyes were blank for a moment. Only now did he realize that she seemed completely different from the unruly princess before. He bit the tip of his tongue, regained his composure, took out a brocade box from his sleeve, and said, "I have a gift for you. It is the treasure of Kijhen Pavilion. Only this kind of treasure is worthy of you." Zhao Man looked at him, shook his head and said, "I can't accept such a precious gift. No matter how precious it is, I am willing to give it to you." Tang Jing stood up and said, "Besides, I have already asked your majesty to propose marriage to you, and we will be a family from now on." Proposing to marry, Zhao Man looked at him, couldn't help but take a step back, and said, "I'm sorry, brother Tang Jing, I have always regarded you as my brother. I will not marry you, please leave." Tang Jing was stunned on the spot, his expression changed, and just as he was about to speak, his eyes suddenly caught a glimpse of the hairpin on her head, and suddenly it seemed as if a basin of ice water was poured from head to toe, making his whole body cold. Zhao Man bowed apologetically to him and walked out of the door. Tang Jing stood there, his face ashen, his fists clenched and his nails dug into his flesh. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 513. Tang Ning sat beside the bed. After a while, Zhao Man walked out of the secret door. Compared with just now, her mood was obviously not very high. Tang Ning hugged her and asked, "What's wrong?" Zhao Man leaned on his shoulder and said, "Tang Jing came to the princess's residence just now. He said that he had asked concubine Hui to propose marriage to the father. He said he wanted to marry me." Tang Ning hugged her and said, "He has a beautiful idea." Zhao Man raised her head, wrapped her arms around his neck, and asked, "You won't let him marry me, will you?" Tang Ning pinched his nose and said, "Don't worry, I have 100 ways to prevent his conspiracy from succeeding." Zhao Man nuzzled into his arms and said dissatisfied, "What a treacherous plot, it's so unpleasant." Tang Ning had actually been mentally prepared for the fact that Emperor Chen would grant Zhao Man a marriage. After all, she is actually over the marriageable age now. Princesses like her in the palace have been married off early. Marrying children of certain powerful families in the capital is a good ending for the princess. Even if it wasn't the Tang family, it would be the Wang family, the Li family or something. As for the Tang family's marriage proposal this time, Tang Ning was actually not sure whether Chen Huang would agree to it. Regardless of his position as a father, as an emperor, after the princesses are no longer useful for marriage, marrying them to ministers or powerful families can also win over a wave of people's hearts or provide comfort. Although King Duan survived the desperate situation in the past few days and got a win from King Kong, in the past 2 years, he was definitely the loser among the two princes. Even the Tang family was affected. The influence in the hall is not as good as before. Emperor Chen was well versed in the art of balance. Tang Ning was not sure whether he would agree to concubine Tang Hui and the Tang family's request to appease Prince Duan of the Tang family, or whether he would listen to Zhao Man's opinion. A restaurant somewhere in Beijing. Half a month ago, the curfew in Beijing was lifted. Every night, the business in restaurants is even better than during the day. In the lobby on the second floor of the restaurant, everyone looked strange when they heard the sound coming from a private room. Many people even stood up angrily and left in a puff of their sleeves. When drinking, it is common to invite several maids to accompany you. It is not surprising to close the door of the box and do taboo things inside. But this was the first time for everyone to see such a fierce scene. The screams coming from the box became louder and louder, making everyone blush. At the door of the box, there were several guards with weapons standing, with expressions on their faces that no strangers should enter, so no one dared to step forward to stop them. Even if his business was disrupted by this, the restaurant owner could only swallow his anger because the people there were the ones he couldn't afford to offend. Half an hour later, Tang Jing came out expressionlessly, straightened out his slightly messy clothes, and left the restaurant under the gaze of everyone. 2 women hurriedly walked in and helped the woman inside out of the side room. Everyone looked at the scene and talked a lot. That seems to be Tang Jing, the eldest son of the Tang family. I have heard of Tang Jing. He is not as dandy as the second young master of the Tang family. He is young and promising, and has a good reputation. Are they all rumors? Oh, the words about good reputation must have been spread by the Tang family themselves. However, Tang Jing's body is really good. For half an hour. Whoever can last for half an hour must have taken medicine. Tang family. Tang Hui looked at Tang Jing, who walked in, and asked, "You came back so late, where have you been?" Tang Jing did not answer, but looked at him directly and said, "Father, you will go to the palace tomorrow to meet His Majesty and ask for my hand in marriage. I want to marry Princess Ping Yang." Tang Hui frowned and said, "Didn't I tell you, don't be anxious? When the time comes, I will go to see His Majesty." Tang Jing looked at him and said seriously, "I can't wait any longer." Tang Hui looked at him for a long time. After a while, his brows relaxed and he said, "Okay, I will go to the palace tomorrow and ask your Majesty for this matter." "Thank you, Dad." Tang Jing cupped his hands, and when he exited the door, he paused, and a hint of gloom appeared on his face, which then turned into a sneer. He really wanted to see Tang Ning's expression after knowing this. He couldn't wait and was so hungry. In the palace, Emperor Chen was walking slowly in the imperial garden. Wei Jian took a big cloak from the guard and said, "Your Majesty, it's cold, please give me this cloak." Emperor Chen put on his big cloak and murmured, "Just now, concubine Hui mentioned Tang Jing and Manner's marriage to me. In the past 2 years, the pressure on the Tang family has indeed been a bit heavy. As a king, you need to be relaxed and relaxed. The Tang family had too much power in the court in the past 2 years. In the past 2 years, it has been weakened many times and the power is not as strong as before. This is what he wants to see as an emperor. But if the suppression continues and the forces between the two parties become unbalanced, that will not be what he wants." After he said something, he seemed to realize something. He looked at Wei Jian and asked, "Why don't you speak?" Wei Jian said, "Your Majesty, this old slave doesn't understand the matters of long-term love between women and marriage between men and women." Emperor Chen looked at him and said, "You old man, if you thought it was good, you would have agreed with me a long time ago. Do you think this marriage is inappropriate?" Wei Jian laughed dryly and said, "I just feel that my childhood sweetheart may not be the same when I grow up." The princess seems to have become less close to Tang Jing in the past 2 years. Huang Chen looked at him with a frown and asked, "Why do I feel that you seem to know something?" Wei Jian was stunned and said blankly, "Your Majesty, I am confused. I have been with your Majesty all day long. Your Majesty knows everything I know." Emperor Chen was about to ask again when a guard came forward and bowed, saying, "Your Majesty, Minister Tang wants to see you and is waiting at the door of the imperial study." Emperor Chen took off his cloak and said, "Go back to the imperial study." Wei Jian took the cloak and lagged behind Emperor Chen by 2 steps. He sighed and shook his head slightly. In the imperial study, Emperor Chen walked to the upper part, looked at Tang Hui, and said, "Please take a seat." Tang Hui raised his eyebrows. It was not the first time that he was given a seat in the imperial study, but it was the first time in the past 2 years. After the chairs were brought up, Emperor Chen looked at him and asked, "Are you here for Tang Jing's marriage?" Tang Hui stood up and knelt down and said, "Jing'er and Princess Changning have been childhood sweethearts. I have long admired her. I dare to ask your Majesty to grant us marriage." Emperor Chen looked at him, a trace of contemplation appeared on his face. After a moment, he said, "Get up." Zhao Man was summoned to the palace by Emperor Chen. "I don't know why. There are many celebrations and festivals in the royal family these days, and she needs to appear on many occasions. Tang Ning was preparing the ingredients. She said that she would come back to eat hot pot in the evening, and she would have to ask someone to go to Xiaoju to get some vegetables." Tang Ning had made up her mind to cultivate a batch of fresh vegetables next winter. This winter was tasteless. Without fresh vegetables, even Tang Yejing's wish to eat a mixed casserole every 2 or 3 days could not be satisfied. In the imperial study, Zhao Man, who had just been summoned to the palace, looked at Emperor Chen and asked, "What does your father want to talk to me about?" Emperor Chen stood up and said, "I am really old. In the blink of an eye, Manner has grown up so much. It won't be long before she gets married. Zhao Man smiled and said, Your Majesty is not old at all. You will never get old. I will not get married and will stay with you forever. Emperor Chen shook his head and said, Men should get married when they are old enough, and women should get married when they are old enough. How can they not get married? Your father asked you to come here today because of this matter. Zhao Man's heart skipped a beat, and the next moment a figure appeared in her mind, which made her heart calm down immediately. No matter what happened, as long as he was there, she would feel at ease. Emperor Chen looked at her and said, You and Tang Jing have been childhood sweethearts, and now you are both of marriageable age. I want to promote your marriage. What do you think? Zhao Man stepped forward and said in embarrassment, Father, I have only regarded Tang Jing as my brother since I was a child, and I have never thought about these things. Can I not marry? I have already agreed to the Tang family. Emperor Chen frowned and said, Tang Jing is handsome and has a prominent family background. What else are you dissatisfied with? Zhao Man looked up at him, nodded after a long time, and said, The king is not joking. Since the father has agreed, the son will listen to the father. She took a step back and said, If the father has nothing else to do, the son will leave. Emperor Chen watched her leave, with a hint of surprise on his face. I thought that if she didn't agree, she would definitely quarrel with him like before, but she didn't expect her to be so well behaved and obedient, which was beyond his expectation. It seemed that after returning from Chu, she had become different from before, less willful and capricious, more mature and steady, and she also changed her self-proclaimed name in front of him from Manor to Sun Minister. I don't know if it's an illusion, but he always has a feeling that he seems to be getting farther and farther away from her. He sat back down, flipped through a few memorials, and stood up, muttering, I am an emperor first, and a father second. Who made her born in the royal family? After a while, he sighed and said to himself, Manor, she must be very sad now. Tang family. Zhao Man sat by the stove, holding a small bowl in her hand. While protecting the bowl, she bared her teeth and claws at Tang Ning, Don't steal my vegetables. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 514. Chen Wang's decision was not beyond Tang Ning's expectations, but it was just earlier than he expected. Emperor Chen was dissatisfied with the Tang family 2 years ago. In the past 2 years, under his suppression, the Tang family's influence in the court was not as good as before. According to Emperor Chen's character, he had no control over these important people. The family will not reward excessively, nor will it suppress excessively. If you give a stick to a sweet date, the Tang family has been beaten so many times, it is time to give a date to comfort them. Unfortunately, Zhao Man became this sweet date again. Although she is indeed very sweet, she already has her own name and no one else can eat her or even look at her. After eating, Tang Ning hugged her and asked, Are you sad? Are you right, father? Zhao Man looked up at him, then shook his head and said, No, in the eyes of father, I am a princess first, and then her daughter. Aren't all emperors like this in ancient times? This sentence is a bit of a generalization. In fact, there are a few emperors who value love and righteousness, but Emperor Chen obviously belongs to the majority. From Tang Ning's understanding of him, what he cares about most is not which prince or princess. The only thing he cares about most is himself. Nothing is sacrificed in order to achieve his goals. Tang Ning patted Zhao Man's shoulder lightly and said, Don't worry, I will take care of this matter. I'm not worried. Zhao Man looked up at him and said with a smile, because I know that I still have you. A man who cannot protect his wife is not a man, but this time is different from before. This marriage is something that Chen Huang is happy to promote, just like he sent her to Chu state to get married. At least it cannot openly violate Chen Huang's wishes. Whether or not the Emperor Chen's wishes were followed is the fundamental difference between this matter and the Lufeng incident, and the methods adopted are naturally also different. Today is Shangyuan, and the streets of the capital have been overcrowded since early in the morning. One day ago, the news that Princess Pingyang was about to be betrothed to the eldest son of the Tang family had already spread. The first people to learn about it were naturally the circles of powerful people. Although these families were not proud to marry princesses, His Majesty's marriage was not just a whim. The Tang family has been languishing in the court for 2 years. This may be a sign of their re-emergence. The capital is neither small nor big, and one day is enough for the news to spread in the capital. When Princess Pingyang was married to the Chu kingdom, she attracted widespread attention in the capital. Later, the Chu kingdom had a coup and the mission to send her relatives returned without success. The common people sometimes talked about this miserable princess, and initially they all held the same attitude. Blessing mentality. Tang Ning left her house around noon, and when she arrived at the entrance of a busy market, a beggar squatting on the street corner immediately stood up. Tang Ning threw a piece of broken silver into his bowl and took a letter from his hand. The streets of the capital, restaurants and brothels, and the entrances of certain officials and wealthy families who need special attention are all monitored by beggar gang disciples on a daily basis. The more times he received help from Sumei, the more he realized the importance of intelligence. He may not have as many magical powers as Sumei, and he has spies in the palaces of powerful officials in Beijing, but the people under Sumei are definitely not as free as the people under him. They can squat under the walls of other people's houses from morning to night and stare at them without attracting attention. People pay attention. The Tang family is naturally his focus. When and where the Tang family members went and how long they stayed, the beggar clan keeps detailed records every day. The core disciples of the gang have been assigned to Ren Pingsheng since 2 years ago. Those who are forced to study and read and don't actively improve themselves will have no choice but to live at the bottom and make ends meet. No one is perfect and no one is perfect. Keep an eye on him morning and night. Even if his reputation is very good, you can still find something that others don't know. For example, when Tang Jing was in a bad mood, he would go to a brothel to vent his emotions. It was said that he also had some special hobbies that few prostitutes in the major brothels in Beijing could tolerate. Naturally, these gossips cannot appear openly in newspapers, but people have always spread the news. Tang Ning did not let anyone publicize this matter in a big way. This was just a test for Chen Huang to see if he could still do you have any conscience as a father? In the imperial study room, Chen Huang flipped through several memorials, rubbed his wrists, and asked, "Is it the Lantern Festival today?" Wei Jian stood behind him and said, "Your Majesty, today is the Lantern Festival. The capital is only bustling every year today. It's a pity that I can't see it on the night of the Lantern Festival. There was a festival in the palace." Emperor Chen shook his head, picked up a memorial again, looked at it, frowned, and murmured said, "Tang Jing, he actually has such a bad side." He pondered for a moment, not knowing what he was thinking. After a while, he closed the memorial in his hand, threw it aside, and never mentioned it again. Outside the imperial study, on the square, an official hurriedly walked towards the imperial study, but was stopped midway. He looked up at the people in front of him. When his eyes moved to the person in front of him, he immediately bowed and said, "Taishi ordered me to see Concubine Hui." Concubine Tang Hui looked at him and asked, "Your Majesty just took a rest. What do you want from your Majesty?" Taishi Ling said respectfully, "To return to your Majesty, your Majesty ordered someone to send the horoscopes of Princess Pingyang and Tang Jing yesterday. The Taishi Bureau has already calculated them and is about to report to your Majesty." Concubine Tang Hui looked at him and asked, "The two of them have been childhood sweethearts since childhood. They must be very compatible with each other, right?" Taishi Ling opened his mouth and said awkwardly, "Back to your majesty, the Taishi Bureau has calculated several times and found that the princess and Mr. Tang have different horoscopes and conflicting fates." Tang Huifei glanced at him calmly and said, "I have had people calculate it long ago. Princess Pingyang and Tang Jing are very compatible. They are a rare good match. Did your Taishi Bureau calculate it wrong?" "You are joking, how could the Taishi Bureau?" The Taishi Ling looked at Tang Huifei and saw her cold expression. His heart skipped a beat and he immediately understood. The marriage of Princess Pingyang and Tang Jing is not as simple as it seems on the surface. It involves the Tang family, Tang Huifei, and Prince Duan. Countless people are looking forward to this marriage. If the Taishi Bureau tells the truth, wouldn't it offend all of them? None of them is someone that a small Taishi Ling can offend. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and said, maybe the Bureau of Historians really miscalculated." Tang Huifei looked at him and said, "Since you miscalculated, take it back and recalculate it a few times. When you get it right, you can hand it over to your majesty." The historian bowed and said, "I obey your command." Tang Huifei glanced at him and turned away. The historian stood in the square with hesitation on his face and even more indecision in his heart. The result of the Bureau of Historians will not be wrong. If you don't report it truthfully, it will be deceiving the emperor. At that time, even if you use the excuse of miscalculation to prevaricate, you will not escape punishment. But if you report it truthfully, I'm afraid the punishment will come earlier. After all, the Tang family has been silent for 2 years. This is an opportunity to come back into the public eye. How can they let it go? If they messed up the situation because of the Bureau of Historians, how can they let themselves go? The grand historian considered it over and over again, finally gritted his teeth, turned around and walked in the direction he came from, muttering to himself as he walked, "The 8 characters conflict with each other, the fate is incompatible, it's very unlucky. Fortunate young gentleman." Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 515. After collecting some information from the beggars sect, Tang Ning prepared to go to Tianrunju to take another look. Today is the Lantern Festival. All the major stores in Beijing are doing very well. Tianrunju has a huge flow of customers. There are even many small vendors at the door, trying to take advantage of the opportunity to get some business. He has been busy these days and has not been to Tianrunju. He has not had time to tell them that Tang Yejing has become his third wife. He had given her a bracelet last time, so he doesn't need to give her another one this time. Tang Ning occasionally wonders if the bracelet has any magic power. Tang Yejing has become his wife not long after wearing it. Thinking about it, this may also be a coincidence. After all, Tang Shui and Su may also have the bracelet. It's impossible that they can also. He pulled the corner of his mouth. This is naturally impossible. He shook his head and prepared to walk into Tianrunju. Just as he walked to the door, before he could step in, someone grabbed his sleeve. Tang Ning looked at the old man in green clothes who was holding him and asked, "What's the matter?" The old man pointed to a sign beside him that read Iron Mouth and Straightforward Prediction and said, "I am Lu Bangxian, known as Godlike. I see that your forehead is full and there is a faint red light in your brow. You will have a romantic encounter in the near future." This old man's outfit is much more professional than Xiaoju's. Tang Ning couldn't help laughing and looked at him and asked, "You can see this too?" The old man was happy in his heart, but his face became serious and said, "Don't be happy, young master, it's too early. If the peach blossom is good, it's peach blossom luck. If it's not good, it's peach blossom disaster. The old man has a plan to help you." "Okay." Tang Ning waved his hand and threw a silver ingot to him. He had things to do and didn't have time to listen to the old man's nonsense. If marrying Tang Yaoyao was a peach blossom disaster, then even if it was a lifetime of peach blossom disaster, he would be willing. This kind of person just wants to say something auspicious and ask for good luck. He happened to be in a good mood, so it wouldn't hurt to give him a few taels of silver. As Tang Ning walked in, a young man next to the old man came up and looked at the silver in the old man's hand with admiration in his eyes. "Did you see that?" The old man put away the silver, looked at his new disciple, and said, "These noblemen just want to hear a good word. If you see them in high spirits, praise them for their numerous romantic opportunities and bright future. These people are willing to hear good words. If you see them worried, say that they are unlucky and cannot escape bloodshed. These people are often willing to spend money to avoid disasters, remember that." The young man nodded as if he understood, and said, "Remember it." Tang Ning walked into Tianranju and walked slowly by the lake. When he was about to go to Su Mei's courtyard, Tang Jing looked up somewhere in front of him, a smile appeared on his face, and he walked over. He walked in front of Tang Ning, paused, looked at him, and asked jokingly, "How are you? How are you feeling?" Tang Ning could see that Tang Jing seemed very happy, which was completely different from the last time he saw him. Without waiting for Tang Ning to answer, he sneered and continued, "You don't have to pretend to be calm in front of me. Don't think I don't know about your affair. It must be uncomfortable to marry your beloved woman to someone else, right?" Tang Jing's expression was a little ferocious, as if something that had been suppressed in his heart for a long time finally came out at this moment, and he sneered, "Those rumors outside were also spread by you. You thought that with those, His Majesty would take back the order. You overestimated yourself and underestimated the Tang family. Wait, your pain has just begun." Tang Ning ignored Tang Jing, but felt that his crazy and almost insane look was pitiful. It was not an easy thing to wipe out the Tang family from the capital, but it was easy to wipe him out. He just wanted to see if Emperor Chen still had any pity and love for Zhao Man as a father. If not, he would cherish her and love her doubly in the future, and try to make up for the missing part in her heart. Tang Ning looked at Tang Jing, whose fists were clenched and veins were bulging on his forehead. He took a step forward, smiled slightly, and whispered, "She's mine. Don't even think about it." After saying that, he simply turned around and left. Tang Jing stood there, breathing rapidly, his chest heaving, and felt dizzy. He didn't see the expression he wanted to see on Tang Ning's face. He had been very calm from beginning to end, as if everything was under control. Instead, he looked like a clown, but what right did he have? This was a marriage granted by His Majesty. How could he dare to openly disobey the imperial decree? Although Tang Jing was looking forward to Tang Ning doing that, he also knew that he was not that stupid. So where did his confidence come from? After speaking out all his thoughts, Tang Jing not only did not feel the slightest bit of happiness, but felt even more depressed and uncomfortable. He had nowhere to vent his anger. Tang Ning's calm expression and oath-like words kept echoing in his mind. He gritted his teeth and walked out with a gloomy face. As soon as he walked out of Tianranju, his sleeve was pulled by someone. An old man in green looked at him and said, "Young master, I see that your forehead is black and bloody. There will be a disaster in the near future. In serious cases, there will be a risk of death. I am Lu Bangxian. Young master, please." Tang Jing was already full of anger. Hearing these words, he suddenly threw away his sleeves, looked at the guards behind him, and said, "Hit me." The old man was kicked to the ground by Tang Jing's guards before he could react. He could only hold his head and shout, "I am Lu Bangxian, nicknamed the God of War. You will be punished for hitting the gods. If you hit me again, I will chant a spell. The Supreme Lord will order you to do it." I really chanted it. The 9 heavens mysterious Sha will turn into divine thunder. Stop it, stop it. Tang Jing's guards punched and kicked the old man. The young Taoist priests beside him watched from a distance and did not dare to step forward. The people around him also stood far away and talked about it. Even the Tang family dared to deceive. Sai Shenxian is going to become a real immortal this time. You are blind. That person is the eldest son of the Tang family and the future prince consort. He deserves his bad luck. But the prince consort was too cruel. I don't know if this old bone can survive it. It would be bad if he killed someone. After a long time, Tang Jing looked at the old man on the ground coldly and turned away. Several guards followed and left. The old man lay on the ground, groaning constantly, but still energetic. After Tang Jing walked away, he pointed at his back and shouted, "You even beat an old man. You must not die well, you must not die well." When Tang Ning heard Tang Jing's hysteria just now, he looked calm, but in fact, he had already written his name in the little notebook in his heart. There is only a thief who can be a thief for 1,000 days, but there is no such thing as a thief for 1,000 days. Before today, Tang Ning did not know that Tang Jing's hatred for him had reached this point. If this trouble is not solved now, it may cause a disaster in the future. As the next helmsman of the Tang family in the capital, Tang Ning will confront him sooner or later. It is better to solve this trouble sooner rather than later. When he walked towards Su Mei's courtyard, his eyes glanced inadvertently and his footsteps suddenly stopped. Not far away, a hunched figure with a cane was walking on the road, stepping deep and shallow. He accidentally stepped on a depression, and his body swayed, and he lost his balance and fell to the ground. Tang Ning stepped forward quickly, helped Wu Lihao up, and asked, "Marquis, are you okay?" "It's General Tang, thank you." Wu Lihao stood up, patted the dust on his body, and said, "It's okay, my old bones can still withstand the fall." He looked around, wrinkles on his face, looked at Tang Ning, and asked, "Why are there so many people here today? When I came here before, there didn't seem to be so many people." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Marquis, have you forgotten that today is the Lantern Festival? It's normal for there to be more people here." Wu Lihao was stunned, and then he suddenly said, "It turns out that it's already the Lantern Festival. Look at me, I've been confused." He leaned on his cane and slowly moved forward, muttering, "The Lantern Festival is a good day, a good day. Fortunate young gentleman." Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 516. Tang Ning pushed open the door and walked in. Su Mei was sitting at the table. She glanced up at him and said casually, "Congratulations, you are about to marry the third lady." Tang Ning walked in and said, "This is a beautiful misunderstanding." Su Mei bit her lip, "Beautiful?" Tang Ning said, "The child has no mother, it's a long story, but it's not what you think." While speaking, he looked away from Su Mei's face, and the action of biting her lip was made by her, as if she was trying to seduce people's soul. "Your third lady is happy, but the fourth lady?" Su Mei said, then counted the numbers on her fingers, shook her head and said, "No, it's the fifth lady." "What should the fifth lady do?" Tang Ning knew that she was talking about Zhao Man, so she walked over, sat down opposite her, and asked, "Do you have anyone under your command who is very good at assassination?" Su Mei looked up at him and asked, "What do you want to do?" Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "Find someone to kill Tang Jing. He will hit with one hit. Even if he is thousands of miles away, no one can find him." Su Mei shook her head and said, "You wouldn't do that." Tang Ning was surprised, "Are you so sure?" Su Mei said, "Because I understand you. There are many ways to solve a problem. It is not Tang Ning's style to kill people and set fires at every turn. The conflict between him and Tang Jing has not reached the point of a fight to the death. Moreover, if Tang Jing was really dead, wouldn't he be the first suspect because he had a grudge against the Tang family? No, we have to get rid of King Kong. Relatively speaking, King Kong hopes that a few people from the Tang family will die. In addition to humanely destroying him, there are many ways to solve the problem once and for all." Sometimes when Tang Ning thought about it, She felt that he was just full of evil. Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "Actually, I came here to tell you that the 27th of this month is the day when Yao Yao and I will get married. Remember to bring your mother here. Mother will go even if you don't mention it." Su Mei stood up, walked to the cabinet, took out a booklet and handed it to him, saying, "Remember to come back after reading it." Tang Ning looked at the booklet in her hand and asked, "What is it?" Su Mei said, "You should be able to use Tang Jing's information." It was good to have such a considerate and capable sister. She knew what Tang Ning needed before he even opened his mouth. The beggar gang could only collect a limited number of things, but from Su Mei, they could find many secrets that even King Kong didn't know, and they didn't know how they collected these things. Tang Ning didn't have time to read this information today. She put aside Tang Jing's matters for now. In the evening, he would accompany Xiao Yi and the others to the Lantern Festival. After the 15th day, if nothing unexpected happened, he would go to the Zioki camp in the next 2 days. The 15th day of the first lunar month is the busiest day of the year in the capital, and it is also the last day without curfew. The people of the capital cherish this rare nightlife and party until dawn almost every year. Tang Ning didn't remember how long she went shopping last night. She only remembered that Xiao Xiao fell asleep while looking at the lights, and it was him who carried her back to sleep. The annual leave given to officials by the imperial court is not short. It lasts for half a month from the first day of the Lunar New Year to the 15th day of the first lunar month. Yesterday, my father-in-law and mother-in-law also slept at home. After breakfast this morning, he went directly to the Jingzhou mansion office. Tang Ning, it will take 2 days to go to Zioki camp. Halfway through breakfast, Peng Chen hurried in, as if there was some important case. His father-in-law took 2 steamed buns and left quickly. Tang Ning returned to the study and opened the book Su Mei gave him yesterday. Tang Jing, apart from some perverted tendencies, has no major flaws. After all, even if the Tang family does something, it will not be traced through his hands. Chen Huang could even know immediately about the newspapers printed by several bookstores in the capital. It was impossible for him not to know that the capital was talking about Tang Jing to this extent. However, until now, there had been no movement in the palace. Tang Ning and Su Mei talked about Chen Huang yesterday, and she gave him a hypocritical evaluation. Tang Ning felt that this evaluation was very pertinent. Maybe he felt a little guilty on the surface, but his decision in his heart would not waver. The Tian family has no relatives. The lyrics are best interpreted by him. After flipping through the booklet Su Mei gave him, Tang Ning found that the easiest and fastest way to solve this problem was to directly destroy Tang Jing's humanity. The sound of hurried footsteps was heard outside the study. Xiaoju walked in quickly, looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Did you do it?" Tang Ning looked at him and wondered, "What did I do?" Xiaoju pursed her lips and said, "Tang Jing is dead." "What?" Tang Ning stood up suddenly and asked in disbelief, "Who died?" "Tang Jing, the eldest young master of the Tang family," Xiaoju said. "Is it really not you?" "I haven't had time to take action yet." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Where did you get the information? Is it credible?" "The Tang family is going crazy. Ping'an County Government, Jingzhou Government Office, the Ministry of Punishment, Dali Temple, all the government offices have taken action." "How can there be any falsehoods?" Xiaoju said, as if he remembered something, and then looked at Xiang. Tang Ning asked, "You just said that you didn't have time to take action. Why did you take action? Do you really want to kill Tang Jing?" "This is not important." Tang Ning looked at Xiaoju and said, "Tell me carefully, how did Tang Jing die?" "He still can't believe it." "Why did Tang Jing die suddenly? Which hero, and who killed him? Someone from King Kang's faction? Or an enemy of the Tang family?" "I only know a little bit," Xiaoju said. "This morning, when the Golden Feather Guards were patrolling the streets, they found a body in a remote street corner. After identification, they found that it was Tang Jing's." Tang Ning asked, anything else? Xiaoju thought for a moment and said, Tang Jing spent last night in a brothel. He left before dawn and was dead when he was found. All his belongings and clothes were gone. The fatal wound was a knife in his chest. Tang Ning continued to ask, anything else? Xiaoju shook his head and said, nothing else. The reason why the capital has a curfew is because of security considerations. On dark and windy nights, there are always many unstable factors at night. Generally speaking, the court will cancel the curfew only for a limited number of days a year. There is naturally no curfew on the Lantern Festival. This kind of excitement will probably last until the second half of the night. At dawn, there will be no pedestrians on the street. Tang Jing died on the street, his property and clothes were robbed. No matter how you look at it, it was a murder case motivated by money. There is no need to even think about it. From today on, all the thieves in the capital will be in trouble. There are many cases every year on Lantern Festival, but most of them are thefts, and there are very few murders. But the one who died was the eldest son of the Tang family in the capital, the son-in-law of the emperor. The death of Tang Jing is different from the death of Han Chang. Han Chang's death at most caused a ripple on the lake surface of the capital, but the death of Tang Jing was enough to cause a huge wave on the lake surface. Xiaoju looked at Tang Ning and asked, you haven't told me why you want to kill Tang Jing. Tang Ning said, don't you know that I will never stop fighting with the Tang family? Xiaoju shook his head and said, if you wanted to kill him, you would have done it long ago. You wouldn't have waited until now. When His Majesty married the princess to Tang Jing, I found out last time that there are so many houses in the capital, but the princess lives next door to yours instead of somewhere else. How can there be so many coincidences in this world? Could it be Tang Ning? Xiaoju looked at him and asked, could it be that the princess really became sworn sisters with your wife? Tang Ning was stunned, looked at him, and said, your idea is very bold. Xiaoju showed an expression of seeing through everything on his face, and said, I have seen them call each other sisters more than once. If the princess is your wife, sworn sisters, it would be natural for you to go to Chu with her and help her get rid of Tang Jing, whom she dislikes. Tang Ning looked at him and said, your idea could be a little bolder. Xiaoju said, it's useless for you to deny it. The princess spends more time with your two wives than Miss Tang does with them. They are as close as a family, not like ordinary friends at all. Tang Ning sighed and said, since you have seen it, I will not hide it from you. They are indeed sisters. Xiaoju showed an expression of as expected on his face and said, I used to suspect that you and the princess had some affair. The princess came to your house all day, and you treated her very well. Now I finally understand. It turns out that this is the case. After all, no matter how beastly you are, you will not attack your wife's sisters. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 517. Of course not. Tang Ning waved his hand and said, who do you think I am? Xiaoju seemed to have thought of something and suddenly asked, is Miss Tang considered your wife's sister? Tang Ning thought for a moment, looked at him, and said, tomorrow you and Ling Feng will report to Zhou Xiaoyi together, and I will give you individual training. No, no. Xiaoju waved his hand and walked out, saying, I was just joking, you can just train Ling Feng. As soon as Xiaoju left, Su Mei walked in. She walked straight into the study, looked at Tang Ning and asked, did you do it? Tang Ning was really wrong this time. He only had this idea, but he had not put it into action. From a legal point of view, this could not constitute a crime. He looked at Su Mei and said helplessly, if I say it's not me, do you believe it? Su Mei was surprised and said, who else could it be? Could it be King Kong? This is a reasonable suspicion. What good would it do for him if Tang Jing died? Although Tang Jing's death would be very good for him, if he did that, wouldn't he be no different from those people in the Tang family? This is not the method he would take. King Kong is the one who most hopes that someone in the Tang family will die. No matter how you look at it, he is the first suspect. Of course, it is not ruled out that the eldest young master of the Tang family is unlucky and happens to meet a desperate criminal who kills for money. His brilliant life has just begun, but it has come to an unsatisfactory end. Tang Ning returned the booklet to Su Mei and said, "This thing is useless, you can take it back." Su Mei looked at him and said, "The capital has been a little unstable recently, and many unknown forces have appeared. Tang Jing's death should not be that simple. You should be careful." Tang Ning asked, "What unknown forces?" "It's not clear yet." Su Mei shook her head and said, "But those people are definitely not simple. They have been hiding in the past few years. I don't know why they have become active recently. As long as the game between those forces in the capital does not affect him, Tang Ning will not care. This is something that Emperor Chen should be worried about." But he still took Su Mei's words to heart. After all, it's better to be careful just in case. During lunch, Zhou Mingli came back, and Tang Ning confirmed the news of Tang Jing's death from him. The information received by Jingzhou Prefecture was not much more than Xiaoju, because Tang Jing's case was very simple. There were no witnesses, and no evidence was left at the scene. If the identity of the deceased was not the eldest son of the Tang family, this was a simple case of murder for money. There are many similar cases in the capital every year, and more than 90% of them cannot be solved. Before the publication of Washing Away Wrongs, this number would be even higher. Of course, because Tang Jing is the eldest son of the Tang family in the capital, and the son-in-law chosen by His Majesty, this case must not be let go. His Majesty was furious, and all the officials and servants from the Dali Temple, the Ministry of Justice, the Government Office, and the County Office were dispatched to solve the case. Anyone in the capital who had a criminal record in the government and had committed crimes was arrested and imprisoned. More than 100 people were arrested within one day. Just after the Lantern Festival, there were not many people on the streets of the capital. Today, officials are walking on the streets from time to time, arresting people everywhere. Everyone in the capital is in danger. If it is not necessary, the people are unwilling to go out. Compared to the deserted streets, a certain street corner is very lively. "Old Lu, did you really calculate that the young master of the Tang family would die?" "What old Lu, calling Lu Bangxian or Sai Shenxian, there is no manners." Yes, Lu Shenxian, you said that the eldest son of the Tang family has a black forehead and a ghost entangled on his head, is it true?" "Of course it's false. When I saw him for the first time, I found that he looked like he was going to die. I had a kind reminder, but he not only didn't believe it, but also asked someone to beat me up. This is retribution. Since you are a god, how could you be beaten up by a few mortals?" Lu Bangxian glared at him and said angrily, "I am a god, how can I be with these mortals have ordinary knowledge, which is detrimental to their cultivation? If they didn't stop at that time, even if I was willing to sacrifice my cultivation, I would have brought down the 9 heavens thunder to split them into charcoal." Someone said, "Master Lu, you are so generous. You are so accurate in fortune telling. Can you help me take a look?" Lu Bangxian coughed lightly and said, 2 cents for men, 1 cent for women and children. I will tell you the fortune and marriage. The price is fair and I will never cheat anyone." "Who is Lu Bangxian?" When everyone rushed inside, a sharp shout suddenly came from outside. Everyone looked back and found that they were several fierce and evil officers, so they hurriedly retreated. Looking at the officers, Lu Bangxian was startled and hurriedly stepped forward and asked, "Several officers, what do you want to see me for?" Click. A policeman put the shackles on his head and said, We suspect you are related to a murder case. Come with us. 2 days have passed, and there is still no progress in Tang Jing's case. It's not surprising that there is no progress. Some villains are just wandering around committing crimes, and the government doesn't even know who did it, let alone arresting them. The problem is that the person who died is the eldest son of the Tang family, the future son-in-law. If this criminal is not caught, the whole capital will not be at peace. Zhao Man was a little disappointed in the past 2 days. Although she had no romantic feelings for Tang Jing, they grew up together after all. Tang Jing's death was also a big shock to her. Tang Ning comforted her for 2 days, and she felt a little better. Now she walked in from the outside angrily and said, "Those people went too far. Why did they say that to me?" Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "What did they say about you?" Zhao Man pouted and said angrily, "They said that I defeated my husband, that I defeated the crown prince of Chu and lost his throne, or that I defeated Tang Jing to death." Tang Ning held her in her arms and said, "They are all nonsense, don't take it to heart." Zhao Man looked up at him and said, "As long as you don't think that way." Tang Ning smiled and said, "Of course I wouldn't think that way." Zhao Man leaned happily on his chest and said, "You are so kind." This news was basically released by Tang Ning, so he naturally wouldn't think so. She is not young anymore, and she will get married sooner or later. Without Tang Jing, maybe Li Jing, Zhang Jing, etc., Tang Ning doesn't want to deal with them one by one. After this incident, he wanted to see who else was not afraid of death and dared to agree to Emperor Chen's marriage offer. However, of course, Zhao Man couldn't tell this matter, otherwise she might not be leaning on his chest happily now, but bite him somewhere in anger. Tang Ning had already visited the Zioki camp yesterday. In the next few days, he planned to get to know the situation first, and then decide how to improve based on the specific situation. When passing by the Tang residence, Tang Ning looked at the cars and horses parked in front of the Tang residence. She hesitated for a moment, looked at Xiaoju and asked, "Do you want me to go in to express my condolences?" Xiaoju looked at him and said, "I advise you to be kind." Tang Ning thought about it. The entire Tang family must be filled with sadness right now. With his relationship with the Tang family, others would definitely not think that he was there to express condolences. Wouldn't this be another stab in the Tang family's wounds? Xiaoju was right, it was better for him to be kinder. Tang Mansion. The eldest son of the Tang family unfortunately passed away. In the past 2 days, dignitaries of all sizes in the capital came to the Tang Mansion to express their condolences. "Master Tang, my condolences. People cannot be resurrected after death. Lord Tang expresses his condolences. Master Tang, take care of yourself." Tang Huai's face looked haggard, he had aged much in the past 2 days, and his eyes were unfocused. Everyone came up to him, gave him a gentle word of comfort, and then slowly walked away. When leaving, they couldn't help but look at the person offering incense in the hall, and sighed secretly in their hearts. Both Wu Lihao and Master Tang had lost their beloved sons recently. It was really pitiful. After Wu Lihao finished offering the incense, he limped up to Tang Huai, looked at him, and said slowly, "My condolences." Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 518. In the Tang Mansion, everyone knew how Tang Huai felt and did not dare to say anything. After expressing condolences, they said a few words of comfort and left in a hurry. One thing that makes the Tang family different from other wealthy families in the capital is that the main lineage of the Tang family is not prosperous. Among the 3 brothers, Tang Huai has only one son, and Tang Qi has only one son. Tang Jing's daughter was picked up from outside of Although this can ensure that there will be no fratricide and fight for power, it also has the biggest disadvantage, that is, if the legitimate son dies, a large family will lose an heir. Of course, it is not difficult to solve this problem. The head of the Tang family has just entered middle age. Although he is no longer as powerful as he was when he was young, he still has the ability to marry a few more concubines and give birth to a few more sons before giving up. If you don't want to take a concubine and you only care about the family, there is no precedent for choosing one from the collateral lineage or the second wife. Obviously, today's Tang Shangshu, Tang Hui, the head of the Tang family, besides being immersed in the pain of losing his son, also has to consider this issue. Brother Tang Chi came over, looked at Tang Hui, and spoke in a hoarse voice. The Tang family suffered great changes, and the impact and losses were far greater than fighting with the parties of King Kang's group. In the past 2 days, everyone in the Tang family was filled with sadness. Tang Hui's eyes were dull and he said, "Let Zhao come back." Tang Zhao went to Jiangnan a month ago, and if everything went well, it would have only been a few days. However, after Tang Jing's death, among the men in the Tang family, he was the only one who was most qualified to inherit the family. Naturally, he could no longer stay outside at this moment. Tang Chi looked at Tang Hui for a long time before nodding and saying, "I will send someone to bring him back right now." Tang Hui was silent for a moment and then asked, "Has the murderer been found?" Tang Chi shook his head and said, "Not yet." Tang Hui patted his robe and said, "Let me get ready. I want to enter the palace to meet the saint." 2 days had passed, and there were still no clues about Tang Jing's case. Emperor Chen had just reprimanded the Minister of Punishment and the Minister of Dali Temple. Not long after he sat back angrily, a eunuch came forward to report, and Tang Hui, the Minister of Rites, asked to see him. Hearing Tang Hui's name, Chen Huang had a headache, but he calmed down and said, "Siang him to come in." After a while, Tang Hui walked into the palace, knelt down and said, "I beg your majesty to give Jing justice." Chen Huang stood up, walked down, helped him up personally, and said, "Don't worry, even without your words, I will get to the bottom of this case." When he said this, his expression was a bit stern. The prince-in-law he had just chosen was found dead in the street within a few days. This was not only a provocation to the Tang family, but also a provocation to His Majesty as emperor. No matter who killed Tang Hui, he would find him. No matter who was behind it, he would uproot him and never tolerate it. His face was gloomy, and a bright light suddenly flashed through his mind. He looked at a eunuch behind him and said, "Summon Gong Sun Ying to see you." Not long after, a middle-aged woman walked into the main hall slowly, bowed and said, "Gong Sun Ying meets your majesty." Emperor Chen looked at her and asked, "Dali Temple has screened out a dozen of the most suspected criminals, but they all deny the crime. Is there any way you can get them to tell the truth?" Gong Sun Ying raised his head and said, "I can give it a try." Half an hour later, more than 10 prisoners with handcuffs and shackles were escorted from Dali Temple into the palace. After the eldest son of the Tang family was killed, the government arrested many people from Beijing. Most of them were the gangsters with criminal records, usually bullied men and women and did some sneaky things. This time, they were all unlucky and suffered a lot in Dali Temple. Although many people were arrested, no one confessed, and no clues were found. Dali Temple had no choice but to select a dozen people with the highest suspicions to deal with the problem first. A dozen people were taken to a side hall, and one person was soon taken out. In a certain palace, Gong Sun Ying looked at the prisoner and said, "Untie his shackles." The prisoner had already received various punishments in Dali Temple and was exhausted. Although the woman in front of him didn't look threatening, the look in her eyes made people shudder. He subconsciously took a few steps back, but the woman opposite suddenly waved her hand, and a black light shot out from her sleeves. Then, he noticed something seemed to be attached to his face, along the nostrils were drilled into it. He covered his face and said in fear, "What is this?" The next moment, the sound from his throat turned into a scream. He covered his head and rolled on the ground. Gong Sunying stepped forward and asked, "Tell me, did you kill the eldest young master of the Tang family?" The man covered his face and his voice came out from between his fingers, "It's not me, it's not me, please spare me, please spare me." Gong Sunying stood aside and looked at him coldly. The man held his head, rolled around on the ground, and kept roaring. "It's not me, it's not me, I have killed people, but I didn't kill the eldest young master of the Tang family. It wasn't me. Please spare me. Spare me, spare me. It feels so uncomfortable, please, please kill me, kill me. Kill me." The prisoner covered his head and rolled around on the ground, getting smaller and smaller, and his voice changed from the initial scream to a suppressed roar. After an unknown period of time, his body twitched a few times and then he stood up. It was motionless and silent. Gong Sunying leaned over and looked, then looked back at Chen Huang and said, "Your Majesty, he bit his tongue and committed suicide." Tang Huai glanced at Gong Sunying, with a hint of defensiveness deep in his eyes. Chen Huang looked at the corpse on the ground expressionlessly and said, "Next one." When the second prisoner was brought into the hall, he walked to the door and saw the body of the previous prisoner being carried in. He turned pale and struggled, "I didn't kill him, I won't go, I won't go." He was dragged in by two guards, and not long after, another shrill scream came from the hall. In the side hall, more than a dozen famous prisoners saw their companions being taken out one by one, but no one came back. The fear in their hearts began to be infinitely amplified, and the atmosphere gradually became turbulent, but they were suppressed by the guards. In another hall, one person was curled up, rolling back and forth on the ground, and kept saying, "I killed this person, I killed him, please give me a good time." Gong Sunying asked, "Since you were the one who killed me, where are the clothes and belongings you took away?" The man's voice trembled, the money is spent, the clothes are burned." Gong Sunying asked again, "What color clothes is he wearing?" The man said, "Red, no, white, white, I killed the person, please kill me." Gong Sunying straightened up, looked at Huang Chen, and shook his head. Under the Gu torture, although many of these people admitted their crimes, they could not bear the pain. They wanted to end it as soon as possible, or simply wanted to die. They were not the real murderers. During the process, they also asked about some of the serious crimes they had committed in their daily lives that could kill their heads, but they still had nothing to do with Tang Jing's case. Emperor Chen looked gloomy, covered his mouth and nose, and walked straight out of the hall. Gong Sunying glanced at the prisoners who had stopped twitching on the ground, and followed Tang Huai out. These people were incontinent due to the extreme pain. At this moment, there was a strong stench in the palace. The two young eunuchs' faces turned red from suppressing their emotions, and they couldn't wait to go out, breathing in the fresh air. In the imperial study room, Chen Huang took a bath and changed his clothes, and felt better. He sat on top, looked at Tang Huai, and said, "You have also seen that these people are not murderers. If you think about it again, who else has such a motive, and who has such a deep hatred against the Tang family?" Tang Huai thought for a while and said, "Your Majesty, I would like to ask you to speak out boldly. There are indeed two people who have such a deep hatred against the Tang family. Fortunate young gentleman author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 519. P.S. The chapter title of the previous chapter was wrong. This chapter has been postponed. It is not a missing chapter. You mean Prince Kong and Tang Ning? Emperor Chen frowned and said, "While Prince Kong is still in confinement, no one in Prince Kang's mansion can go out, and no one else can enter. How did he arrange for someone to kill Tang Jing? As for Tang Ning..." Chen Huang paused, looked at him, and said, with his ability, if he really wanted to avenge his parents and assassinate the Tang family, your Tang family would have been dead long ago. Tang Hui lowered his head and said, other than that, I can't imagine anyone else who has such a deep hatred against the Tang family. Chen Huang looked at him with a thoughtful look in his eyes. Although King Kong was temporarily imprisoned at home, if he had the intention, he might not be able to send the message secretly. He was fighting with King Duan's party to join the party. If he really assassinated Tang Jing because of this and used this to attack the Tang family, it would have touched the heart of him. Bottom line. As for Tang Ning, although he believed that Tang Ning could not have done this, the case has now become an unsolved case. If anyone is still capable of solving the case, it is him. He had already proven all this when he was in the Ministry of Justice. Emperor Chen looked at Wei Jian and said, King Xiankong and Tang Ning enter the palace. Tang Ning was called from the Zioqi camp by the eunuch who passed the order. When he walked into the royal study, he saw King Kong standing in the palace. He seemed to have heard something incredible. His expression was in disbelief at first, and then it turned into surprise. He said, Father, what did you say? Tang Jing is dead. King Kong was really pitiful. During this period of time, he was locked up and isolated from the world. There were guards guarding the entrance of the palace for 12 hours. People inside could not leave and people outside could not enter. Tang Jing had been dead for 3 days. He actually didn't know about such a big thing until now. Tang Hui stood in the palace, staring at King Kong. He saw an excited look on his face, clenched fists, and bloodshot eyes. Are you happy that Tang Jing was killed? Chen Huang slammed the table, stood up, and said loudly, Tell me, were you secretly instigating this matter? King Kong was startled, and then he immediately said, Father, I have been wronged. These days, I have listened to my father and meditated on my past in the palace. I read and practiced calligraphy every day. I have not even left the palace. No one else came in or out. How could the father doubt his son? Chen Huang stared at his face and saw that he didn't look like he was lying at all. His expression when he learned about Tang Jing's death didn't look like he was lying. He finally moved his eyes away from his face and looked at Tang Ning. Tang Ning looked at Emperor Chen, cupped her hands and said, Your Majesty, I swear by my conscience that this case was neither done by nor instigated by me. Please investigate carefully. I don't doubt you. Emperor Chen looked at him and said, Neither the Ministry of Punishment nor the Dali Temple have found out the reason for this case. I am handing it over to you now. Do you have confidence? No. Tang Ning shook her head and said, Your Majesty, the Ministry of Punishment and the Dali Temple have not investigated the case. How can I find it out by myself? Besides, although Tang Jing's death has nothing to do with me, I have a lot of connections with the Tang family. If someone has a grudge, he is also one of the people who should be suspected. The minister in this case should avoid suspicion. Chen Huangdao, I ask you to investigate, just do it. I know the grudge between you and the Tang family, but this case is about life and death. You must find out the reason for me. Tang Ning cursed in her mind. This old boy Chen Huang was obviously unreasonable. There were no clues in Tang Jing's case. Normally, it would have been regarded as a common murder case. He still had to find out a case. So, what if someone is really interested in wealth and happens to be bumped into by Tang Jing? The capital is so big, where can he find the murderer? But there was no way to reason about this matter. Tang Ning nodded with an annoyed expression and said, I'll try my best. Since Chen Huang asked him to investigate, he would just do whatever he wanted. If he found the murderer, he would be able to make a deal, but if he couldn't, he wouldn't do anything to him. Or you could just find someone to take the blame. Tang Ning felt that King Kong was a very suitable person, with motivation and strength. In fact, he was also doubting whether King Kong did this. The two of them walked out of the imperial study together. King Kong noticed the eyes looking at him from the side. His heart skipped a beat and asked, "What are you looking at me doing?" Tang Ning shook her head, "No." King Kong felt guilty because of his look just now, and said angrily, "You obviously saw it." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "His Highness really didn't kill Tang Jing?" "I already told you, how can I kill him when he is imprisoned in the palace?" King Kong looked at Tang Ning and said coldly, "I doubt whether you killed Tang Jing. After all, you and the Tang family have such a big relationship." "Hatred." Tang Ning smiled and said, "What a coincidence. I also suspect that His Highness did it. I don't know what His Majesty thinks." King Kong finally understood where the bad feeling just now came from. His father asked Tang Ning to investigate the case. If he dumped this blame on him, given his character, his father might really believe him. King Kang's expression changed drastically. He pointed at him and said angrily, "I'm warning you, there is no evidence, you'd better not talk nonsense to your father. There is no evidence to create evidence." Tang Ning glanced at him, said lightly, and walked away. King Kong looked at him angrily and slightly panicked, and was about to chase after him when a eunuch behind him stepped forward and said, "His Royal Highness Prince Kong, His Majesty has told you to return home immediately." Just after taking a few breaths of fresh air, he was about to enter the cage again. King Kong clenched his fists, feeling uneasy. In the end, he could only speak in a low voice, saying, "I know. Things in this world are really amazing. A few days ago, Tang Jing mocked and threatened him, but now he wants him to investigate the truth of his death." After a long time, Tang Ning once again stepped into the Tang family. He was accompanied by Xiaoju, who was curious about this matter, and old Zheng, who served as a guard. Neither Tang Hui nor Tang Qi appeared. Only one guard led them. After walking a few steps, the guard lowered his head and said to the person in front of him, "General Manager Han." Tang Ning raised his head and looked at an old man in front of him. The old man had an empty sleeve and only one arm. Tang Ning looked at Xiaoju and asked, "Will you come to my house for dinner this afternoon? We have braised pork elbows and 5-spice chicken feet." "Okay." Xiaoju swallowed subconsciously and said, "I'll bring Lu Ya with me tonight." The one-armed old man clenched his remaining arm into a fist and looked at Tang Ning with murderous intent in his eyes. However, when he saw Zheng the butcher behind Tang Ning, his face suddenly turned pale and he took a few steps back. His back was instantly soaked with cold sweat. Tang Ning didn't look at the old man again and walked straight past him. Xiaoju followed him and said, "Can you not have the 5-spice chicken feet? I think it's good to stew them." The one-armed old man stood in the yard, looking at the back. The knife in the rain could not help but appear in his mind, and his body couldn't stop shaking. Tang Ning came to the Tang mansion today to see Tang Jing's body. Of course, he was not gloating, but a formal autopsy. Tang Jing's body was in the morning hall. Fortunately, it was winter now, and the body was placed in an ice coffin, so it would not decay in a short time. Tang Ning pointed at the ice coffin, looked at the two Dali Temple officers behind him, and said, "Take off his clothes." The guard of the Tang family stopped them and said angrily, "Don't be disrespectful to the young master's body." Tang Ning looked at him and said, "How can we investigate the case without examining the body? How about you investigate it?" The guard looked back, gritted his teeth, and slowly stepped back. Tang Jing had only one wound on his body, which was the fatal wound on his chest. After the Dali Temple officers took off his clothes, the wound on his chest was revealed. An officer brought a box and opened it. Tang Ning used a white cloth to pad it and took out a dagger from the box. This dagger was found on Tang Jing's body and was also the murder weapon in this case. Tang Ning felt a little sorry. If there was fingerprint recognition technology in this era, solving this case would be very simple. He took the dagger, compared it with the dagger, and put it back. Xiaoju came up and said, "This case is very simple. Someone should have wanted to rob Tang Jing of his money. Tang Jing resisted, and the man took out a dagger and stabbed him to death in a panic. It seems that you should practice martial arts in your daily life, otherwise you can't even beat a small thief. Lao Zheng glanced at the corpse and said, "Wrong." Xiaoju looked at him and said in surprise, "What's wrong?" Lao Zheng said calmly, "It's not stabbing, it's chopping. The murderer used a dagger, but used knife skills, and this person is definitely not a small thief. This person's knife skills are superb. Killed in one blow, if it were you, it would be the same end." Xiaoju obviously didn't want to listen to Lao Zheng's words. He curled his lips and said, "If you say it is, then it is. Do you have any evidence?" Swish. As soon as Xiaoju finished speaking, a white light flashed in front of him. Old Zheng put the butcher knife back behind him. Xiaoju looked down and saw that his clothes had been cut, revealing his white chest. The white mark on his chest was exactly the same as Tang Jing's wound in terms of length and angle. If the knife had been moved a little further, he would have suffered the same fate as Tang Jing. He swallowed his saliva, his legs trembling. He held onto Tang Ning's shoulders, looked at old Zheng, and said in a trembling voice, "Let's talk it over. Why use a knife?" You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 520. Tang Ning was no longer surprised by Lao Zheng's superb knife skills. When he picked up the butcher's knife, Xiaoju was no different from a piece of pork in his eyes. He looked at Lao Zheng and asked, in other words, the murderer who killed Tang Jing was probably a master? Lao Zheng said calmly, "I don't know whether his martial arts skills are high or not, but he must use the sword often. He won't be able to make this chop in less than 20 years. Leave professional issues to the professionals. Lao Zheng is the ancestor of the sword, and his words are more trustworthy than those of Wu Zhou. It is still necessary to come over for an autopsy today." In this way, the scope of the murderer can be further narrowed, and the possibility of murder motivated by money can almost be ruled out. People who can be evaluated like this by Lao Zheng are much less likely to kill people because of money. Of course, for this case without any clues, one more clue is of no use. When Tang Ning walked out of the morning hall, she saw Tang Shui and a middle-aged man standing outside the hall. Among the three brothers of the Tang family, he often sees Tang Qi and Tang Hui, but he has never seen Tang Jing. He is the most low-key among the three brothers and does not usually appear in front of others. Tang Ning didn't have any resentment towards him, not only because he was Tang Shui's adoptive father, but also because he was the only person in the Tang family who secretly helped them escape. He had heard all about it. Tang Jing looked at him and asked, "Did you find anything?" Tang Ning said, "A little clue is of little use." He smiled at Tang Shui, then left straight away, walked to the door of Tang's house, looked at Xiaoju who still put his arm on his shoulder, and asked, "What are you doing?" Xiaoju's face turned pale, she pursed her lips and said, "Please hold me a little longer." In the Tang family, Tang Jing looked at the direction where Tang Ning disappeared. Tang Shui looked up at him and asked, "Dad, do you, like the uncle and others, suspect that he killed your eldest brother?" Tang Jing shook his head and said, "He is different from them." "Them?" Tang Shui looked at him and wondered, "Who are they?" Tang Jing didn't answer, just looked at her, smiled, and said, "Your birthday is coming soon, what gift do you want?" Tang Shui sighed and said, "I don't want any gifts, I just want to be peaceful and safe, and don't want anything bad to happen again." Tang Ning is not Derenja or Bao Qingtian. She does not insist on getting to the bottom of the matter and giving justice to Tang Jing. This is what the Ministry of Punishment and Dali Temple need to do. Tang Jing's death had nothing to do with him. The Tang family was saddened, but his debt with the Tang family was not settled yet. He held a dagger and made a chopping gesture like Lao Zheng did in the Tang family. Xiao Xiao stood beside him and asked doubtfully, "Brother, what are you doing, practicing swordsmanship?" Tang Ning looked at her and asked with a smile, "This is obviously a dagger, why do you think I'm practicing with it?" Xiao Xiao said, "My brother is obviously using sword skills, and they are very strange sword skills." Tang Ning was stunned and asked in surprise, "Weird?" Xiao Xiao nodded and said, "Master said this kind of sword technique is wrong." Old Zheng spoke highly of this sword, but the old beggar denied it. One was a sword master and the other was a martial arts master. Tang Ning didn't know who to believe. The old beggar came over, glanced sideways at him, and asked, "Boy, are you questioning me?" Tang Ning glanced at him and asked, "Did I question it?" The old beggar looked at Xiao Xiao and said, "If you are not convinced and think what I taught you is wrong, you can compare it with my good disciple." Although Tang Ning didn't want to bully the little girl, it would be nice to look at the progress of her martial arts. She had been learning martial arts with the old beggar for so long, and she didn't know how she was doing. He looked at Xiao Xiao and said, "Let's go to the martial arts training ground." Xiao Xiao smiled sheepishly and said, "Brother, it's better not to." Tang Ning looked at her smile and seemed to realize something, and asked, "Xiao Xiao, who do you think is more powerful, you or Sister Yao Yao?" Xiao Xiao thought for a while and said, "Sister Yao Yao should be more powerful, I am not her opponent yet." Tang Ning was unsure, a little. Xiao Xiao nodded. Tang Ning touched her head and said, "Learn martial arts from your master and listen to his words." After saying that, he turned around and left. If he stayed with her any longer, his self-esteem and self-confidence would be gone. He walked up to Lao Zheng and asked, "Do you think that sword technique is strange?" "It's rare but strange," Lao Zheng said without raising his head. "On the battlefield, any fancy moves are seeking death. During the confrontation, there is no time to even raise the sword. A true veteran can use the sword at any angle. It's fatal. If you miss the first blow, you won't have the chance to strike a second time." Tang Ning thought for a while, looked at him and asked, "You mean, the murderer has most likely been on the battlefield and is a warrior? Masters have the dignity of masters. If they want money, there are many ways besides killing people. However, the possibility of a strong general who has retired from the battlefield to do such a thing is very small. Therefore, this case is most likely a vendetta, not an ordinary murder case. This is the reason why Tang Ning doesn't want to investigate the case easily. Not everyone can hire such veterans. Most of them exist in the homes of powerful people in the capital, as bodyguards. For the sake of the Tang family, he has not offended other powerful people. Selfless to this extent. However, now that things have come to this, he really wants to see who has such a big grudge against the Tang family. The hatred of killing his son is irreconcilable. He stayed at home for a while and then prepared to go out again. Xiaoju changed his clothes and just walked to the door. He looked at him and asked, "Where are you going?" Tang Ning said, "Go to the scene." Xiaoju followed him and said, "Wait for me." The place where Tang Jing died was a remote alley in the capital. From the brothel where he left to the main street, you have to pass through such a shabby alley. The Ministry of Justice protected the scene very well. The whole alley was sealed off and no outsiders were allowed to approach. It seems that the Minister of Justice did not ignore the things he left for them before leaving the Ministry of Justice. The scene now only left a pool of blood, and there was nothing worth seeing. Tang Ning looked around. After leaving the alley, he would reach the main street. At dawn after the Lantern Festival, there were not many pedestrians on the street, but there were still some. If the murderer was careful enough, he would never leave the main street in a swagger after killing someone. Tang Ning walked to the depths of the alley. There was a high wall in front of him. There was no way forward. He thought about it, jumped up, and used the wall to gain leverage a few times. He easily climbed up the wall. This set of movements was smooth and flowing. Xiaoju was stunned from below and couldn't help saying, "You can climb such a high wall. Are you a thief?" Tang Ning's eyes swept across the wall. When his eyes moved to a certain place, his eyes fixed. Two handprints were clearly visible on the wall not far in front of him. He looked down at Xiaoju and said, "Have someone bring paper and pen. Outside this wall is a wasteland. Apart from himself, no one should be idle enough to climb over the wall at the end of this alley. And judging from the traces of the handprint, it should have been left not long ago." Tang Ning carefully copied the handprint on the wall and then jumped down. Although this thing is not as useful as fingerprints, it also has a high reference value. Xiaoju looked at the handprint on the paper, then looked up at the wall and said in surprise, "Such a high wall can be climbed over. It seems that the person who killed Tang Jing is indeed a master." As he spoke, he looked at Tang Ning again and asked, "When did your martial arts become so good?" Tang Ning waved his hand and said, "I just happen to be good at climbing walls." People who practice martial arts have their own strengths. Some are good at boxing, some are good at kicking, some are strong in swordsmanship, and some are good at light work. Tang Ning is not very outstanding in other aspects. When it comes to climbing walls, he really has never been defeated by anyone except Tang Yao Yao. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 521. The top of the wall was very clean. It seemed that the people in the Ministry of Justice and the Dali Temple had not expected that the murderer would climb over such a high wall. Tang Ning had not expected that the more he investigated this case, the more unusual it would become. Based on the clues currently available, this was more than 90% a deliberate murder. Various clues showed that Tang Jing's death was not so accidental. He put the paper away, looked up at the wall, and said, "Go around and have a look. As the saying goes, a horse will die if it runs to the mountain." There was only one wall, but it took Tang Ning, Xiaoju, and others at least 2/4 of an hour to go around it. Outside the wall was not another street, but a wasteland. No one should come here on weekdays. There were no footprints on the ground. Tang Ning looked behind him, told the Dali Temple to wait there, and asked Xiaoju and Lao Zheng to wait for a while. He walked carefully to the bottom of the wall by himself and squatted down to take a closer look. The ground outside the wall was not soft, but there was still a row of footprints that were clearly visible. Combined with the handprints on the wall, the identity of this person was self-evident. Those guys in the Ministry of Justice had never come here to see it from beginning to end. They had defined this case as a case of greed from the beginning. Fortunately, he was no longer in the Ministry of Justice and was not their superior, otherwise he would have been pissed off by them. Xiaoju stood in the distance and finally couldn't help it. He walked along the footprints that Tang Ning had walked and asked, "What's wrong? Did you see anything?" Tang Ning pointed to the first pair of footprints and asked, "Did you see anything?" Xiaoju looked at the deep footprints, then looked up at the wall and said, "Obviously, this was left by the murderer when he jumped down from the wall." Tang Ning asked, "What else?" Xiaoju was surprised and said, "What else?" Tang Ning shook his head and said, "These footprints, each pair has one deep and one shallow. It seems to be true." Xiaoju, after thinking for a while, he said, "I understand. This means that the murderer has one long leg and one short leg." Tang Ning looked at Xiaoju. He had a high IQ and could often find the right direction for the problem, but he was always a little short of the truth. Xiaoju looked at him and asked, "Why, is my guess wrong?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "It's about the same. Although there are differences between a person's legs, they are not big. The difference between the high and low legs cannot cause such a significant difference in the depth of the footprints. This line of footprints can show that this person's legs are quite inconvenient and there is a high possibility of lameness. At this point, the image of the person who killed Tang Jing was very clear in Tang Ning's eyes. He may have been in the army for a long time, was good at using a knife, and was lame. The most important thing was that he had a deep hatred with the Tang family. This hatred prompted him to cut off the incense of the Tang family's direct line, causing the Minister of Rites Tang Hui to have no descendants. The footprints extended to a far place and disappeared at the end. These were the only clues they could find. Fortunately, this place is remote and no one usually passes by, otherwise it would not be easy to find these. After Tang Ning copied the footprints, he stood up and prepared to leave. Xiaoju stood up, patted the dust on his robe, and said, "This is not far from Wu Lai Ho Mansion, let's go see Brother Han." Tang Ning nodded and said, "Okay." This is Tang Ning's third time to Wu Lai Ho Mansion. Each time he came, he saw a completely different scene. The first time was to send Han Chong back to the mansion, the second time was to come here to pay condolences, and the third time he came, the door of Han Mansion was ajar. Tang Ning and Xiaoju pushed the door open and entered. Not only did they not see a doorman, they didn't even see a servant. After passing through a door, they finally saw a figure. Wu Lihao was sweeping the courtyard with a broom in his hand. When he heard the sound at the door, he raised his head, smiled slightly, and said, "You are here." Xiaoju walked forward, looked around, and asked, "Brother Han, where are the servants at home?" "I asked them to leave." Wu Lihao waved his hand and said, "I am the only one left at home, why do I need servants?" Xiaoju took the broom from him and said, "You can't leave none at all. You have to keep two to clean and cook, and your legs are inconvenient." Wu Lihao smiled and said, "Don't underestimate me, a cripple. A cripple can do a lot of things." He looked at Tang Ning and Xiaoju and asked, "Sit down for a while, I'll go get you some tea." "No need," Xiaoju said quickly, "we just passed by here and came in to take a look." "Don't be busy. That won't work. Guests are coming, and there's not even a cup of hot tea." "Yes, how can this be done?" Wu Lihao waved his hand, took out the teacup, poured 2 cups of tea for them, sat opposite them, looked at them and said, "You two are the most promising young people in the capital, but you should be more careful even if you are outstanding. The water in the capital is deeper, muddier and dirtier than you think." Wu Lihao seemed to be sighing. Xiaoju smiled and said, "Don't worry, Brother Han, we are also good at muddying the water." Wu Lihao suddenly looked at Tang Ning and asked, "I heard that His Majesty handed the case of the eldest son of the Tang family to you." Tang Ning nodded and said, "This case is not simple." Wu Lihao asked, "Have you found anything?" Tang Ning shook his head and said, "I found some clues, but they are of no use." "We should investigate." Wu Lihao nodded and murmured, "It is the eldest son of the Tang family who died, not someone else, we should investigate." Although Wu Lihao has not yet recovered from the pain of losing his son, he looks much better than a few days ago. Tang Ning and Xiaoju sat in Han's house for a while, then stood up to say goodbye. Wu Lihao saw them to the door. Xiaoju turned around and waved, saying, "Brother Han, you can go back." Wu Lihao nodded, turned around, and limped out. Xiaoju stood at the door of Han's house, muttering, "It's still the Tang family that has the background." When Han Chong died, there was no such a big commotion in the capital. "Don't sigh, let's go." Tang Ning looked at him, shook his head and said something, and was about to leave. Just as he took a step, he suddenly stopped. He turned around, and when he turned around and looked at Wu Lihao's house again, a trace of surprise appeared on his face. Xiaoju looked at him and asked, "What's wrong with you?" "Nothing." Tang Ning shook his head and turned to the Dali Temple officials and said, "Go to the Dali Temple." Xiaoju watched him leave quickly, shook his head inexplicably, and walked towards the direction of the Xiao mansion. After walking a few steps, his steps slowed down, and finally stopped. He turned around slowly and looked at the Wu Lai Marquis mansion with an incredible expression on his face. When Emperor Chen handed Tang Jing's case to him, he also gave him great power. He could transfer all the files of the Ministry of Justice and the Dali Temple at will. Tang Ning walked to the place where the files were stored, looked behind him, and said, "You go out first, I'll find it by myself." The case files of the Dali Temple were sorted by time and filled up a whole room. Han Chang's case happened half a month ago, and Tang Ning easily found all the files of the case. It took him a quarter of an hour to read through all the files. Although the case was reasonable in every detail, it could be closed in a small place like the local county government, but this is the Dali Temple, and several key details should never be so lightly revealed. He distanced himself from the information in his mind, and when he walked out of the Dali Temple, he saw a figure standing outside waiting for him. He walked over and asked, "Why haven't you gone back yet?" Xiaoju looked at him and said solemnly, "Have you thought of something too?" Tang Ning looked at him and nodded slightly. Xiaoju asked, "Why?" Tang Ning said, "Come with me to a place. If I guess correctly, the answer is there." Xiaoju asked, "Where?" "Liujia village, the home of the guard in the Han mansion."